Blog Talk Radio.
Hello everyone, good morning. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. It is Tuesday morning, 6 o'clock here, Calgary, Alberta time, July the 20th. I am happy to be here. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room is open. This one child abuse survivor to another. And yeah, I'm just glad to be able to continue to do these shows. I'm just waking up and having some coffee and getting my information ready here. I wanted to continue talking about the article that I found on the Adults Surviving Child Abuse website. That's www.asca.org.au. And there's some good information on there, all kinds of different stuff that I haven't really seen elsewhere. You know, I really liked the fact that it was just a little bit different than some of the stuff I've seen out there. Almost a little bit more inclusive and descriptive, you know. So I really like this website, and I hope everybody will go and check it out. We're going to continue talking about that this morning, looking at pathways through which adult health can be compromised, adapted from Creating New Possibilities Workshop 4. And so that's on their website there at www.asca.org.au. And so yeah, I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I don't hold any professional certificates or anything like that in those areas. I'm just a private citizen who pays to do my own blog talk shows and just to get the information out here to people that you know who may be survivors of child abuse themselves, or just who are advocates fighting to stop child abuse. And I'm just glad to be able to do it as a survivor myself. I understand a lot about what it's all about, and so I just feel like abuse is just not talked about enough. Mainly, what we hear is what's in the paper, and that's the headlines. That's the aftermath of the abuse, right? So we either hear of a child who's been murdered or killed at the hands of their parents or caregivers, or we hear of a child who's in a hospital due to abuse-related injuries, and then we hear no more about it. And there's no possibly around the country in North America, there might be articles written, that talk about, prevention of child abuse in different newspapers and whatnot, but it's not usually talked about mainstream, like on the news or the radio. No one seems to be discussing the issues surrounding adult survivors of child abuse, and it's very rare, even though I know there's voices out there, and I know quite a few of them, advocates who are really fighting to stop child abuse and who are really trying to bring the information out about, domestic violence, domestic abuse, and whatnot. There's quite a few here on Blog Talk Radio. If you just need that information, let me know. I've actually spotted quite a few of them. And so, I just want to be one more voice, really, just to get this information out to people and, allow people to sort of see that they're not alone. There is help out there, and that we don't have to suffer in silence. We don't have to continue on, suffering on our own. That's sad when a survivor sort of, I know myself, I did that, for nearly 41 years. Didn't reach out and didn't really cope well with the whole thing. I was trying to cope on my own and never really reached out to get help. So, finally, when I did reach out and start getting some help, which is mainly nearly about a year ago now, almost, that's when my life started to really change, because I had never reached out before, and so I didn't have any real support. But now that I did reach out, I have so much support from so many people, and it really makes all the difference in my life. I started my healing journey 3 years ago, and since I started reaching out, I feel like it's accelerated, like 100%, because of the support that I've been given. So I really appreciate everyone who has been there with me and for me, all my good friends and my I call them my sisters, and my brothers. So I thank you so much for being here for me. And so that's why I want to continue doing these shows. And if you're a young person under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show, because there's a lot of adult content on here. And I really, I'm fighting to save children's lives, and so are a lot of other people. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dream Catchers for Abused Children. Glad to be. It's a volunteer position, which I love dearly. And we work around the clock really to try to change this world for the better for children, and try to get the information out there to parents so that they can protect their children. And also, if you're a young person, listening to this show or anything like this, you want to have someone know what you're listening to and what you're doing online, because there's so many crazy people out there, child sexual predators and pedophiles and whatnot, who, are working around the clock to try to get a hold of children so they can assault them. And the FBI and other agencies within the United States and the RCMP up here in Canada are working 24 hours a day to try to stop child sexual predators from getting a hold of children. But nevertheless, they are, and it's unfortunate, and you do not want to be a victim of a child sexual predator. You want to keep yourself safe, and you want to have an adult know what you're doing online. You want to get the information on how to stay safe online. So if you are a young person listening, which I'm not sure where the players are now, you want to have permission to listen to my show, I would really appreciate it. And then they can tell you whether or not you should be listening to it, or they can help you find information should you need further information and just not sure where to find it. Abuse is not talked about very often in mainstream society. No one really wants to talk about it because it's very painful, and it's something that society has pushed under the carpet and hidden away behind closet doors, locked away. Abusers want it silenced. Abusers don't like the fact that people come out and disclose the abuse because it makes them look bad, and they also may face charges. And so abusers, of course, and they don't want to stop their behavior. Of course, they'd have to change their behavior, and that means they would have to really probably have some counseling and talk to a psychologist, right, to learn how to stop abusing people. And most abusers don't want to admit that they have a problem. And so, society wants it silenced because they don't want to have to deal with it. It's very disturbing what happens to children when they're abused, and looking at these headlines out here all the time, which is what we do. It's no wonder society wants to turn a blind eye to it. But when you've survived child abuse and you know what it's like to be battered and abused verbally, physically, sexually, emotionally, psychologically, it's spiritually, it's absolutely horrible. And so as a survivor myself, I can no longer sit on the sidelines and be quiet no longer. And so, silence is a lot of the problem surrounding abuse. In families, no one wants to talk about it. They just want to keep it hushed up so nobody will know their secrets, right? Nobody will know what happened in their family, because then people might look down on them and they might face charges. So see, it's a real issue with silence. And so, abuse is not talked about very often, and that's why I'm doing these shows. And so if you're a young person, I just ask you have permission to listen to my shows. And if you're a survivor who's just starting your healing journey, I just ask that you be very cautious. The material can trigger people, and so you have to be aware that when you're listening to any show like this, whether it's mine or another show regarding abuse topics, that it could trigger you. And so you want to be in a safe place when you're listening to my show. Make sure you have someone with you, and if you're not feeling strong enough that day to listen to it, just turn it off. You can come back and listen to the archives another time when you're feeling stronger, feeling more, able to cope with the information. And you want to be in a safe place when you're listening, right? So I'll get right on with the show. And this is from Adults Surviving Child Abuse and ASCA. That's www.asca.org.au out of Australia. And I really like this website. I hope everybody will go and check it out. Pathways through which adult health can be compromised, adapted from creating new possibilities, workshop 4. And they say here, I'm just reading right from the page, we have all heard the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and time heals all wounds. These bits of common wisdom conjure a picture of traumatic experiences that, once overcome, result in greater levels of psychological, physical, and emotional well-being. Although trials and tribulations can certainly build character, they can also create permanent biological, neurological, and psychological compromise. That's from Causalino, 2002. The impact of traumatic events on infants and young children is often minimized in this way. It is ironic that during infancy and childhood, a time of the greatest vulnerability to the effects of trauma, adults generally presume greater resilience. That's from Perry, Pollard, Blakely, Baker, and Vigilante, 1995. The effects of early and severe trauma are widespread, devastating, and difficult to treat, and that's from Causalino, 2002, and Giriatano from 2004A. And that's just true, My mom used to say that to me, that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, right? Because she was abused as a child too. And that's how they felt. They were born in the 1920s, my parents, and they had to survive the Depression first of all, and then they had to survive their parents, which was just a miracle that they actually survived that. And then they went on to have these horribly dysfunctional adult lives. And there was no help for those people back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. There was nobody, no one was talking about abuse, and if anybody was abused, they considered it just to be their life and normal. So then when they raised their children, they would just raise their children the same way they were raised, whether it was physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, psychological, spiritual abuse, right? They just pass it right on. So that's why it escalated in such a bad way, because nobody wanted to talk about it. It was considered very taboo to mention your family's problems, and to try to reach out and get help would have been impossible. I know my mom talks about trying to get a divorce in the 1940s up here in Canada, and they would not grant her one due to the fact there was no infidelity, that there was no unfaithfulness between my mom and dad. So, they didn't care about the abuse, because my mom was telling the courts about the abuse and everything, and towards her and towards the children. And she wanted to divorce my dad, and they said, nope, sorry, you can't divorce because there's no infidelity. So he could go ahead and he could abuse my mom and he could abuse the children and get away with it. So that's what happened, and he did. So, my dad just thought he was doing what was the normal thing. See, that's the problem, because my dad is a little bit, he's got borderline schizophrenic issues, as well as probably some other personality disorders. And so, when he was younger, he was fit. He was in the air. He was in the service up here in Canada. He was a young man. He was very fit, physically fit, and he was a bit cocky. And he thought that, maybe that's how you're supposed to treat your wife, by withholding love, withholding money, slapping them around, pushing them around, making them do what you want them to do physically by using force. And that's what he did to my mom and all the children that were born around that time, even though some of my siblings refused to admit that that's what happened. I know what happened, because periods of my life they would actually talk to me about certain things, and then they would forget that they told me, and then I would remember, and then they'd go on to say something different later, like 20 years later. But I remembered all this stuff because I was recording it, because I grew up in hell. And so I was recording all the details, and I don't know why. Possibly it was my way of staying alive. You know what I mean? I needed to not go off into some sort of disassociation, because I think in order for me to stay sane, I had to have something to be grounded with. So I was just recording stuff in my brain all the time, whatever my mom would tell me, whatever my siblings would tell me, and it would just stay there, And so I remember really a lot of stuff that, my parents would say, and that my sister and older brothers would say about what their life was like. And just depending on when you would talk to them later as adults, you would get sort of different stories from them, because they didn't want to admit the abuse either, because that means they would have had to admit they had a problem. Even though my sister was a bit suicidal, she had a gun, and she used to take off for a few days here at a time. And my older sister, who's passed on, and she used to threaten suicide and stuff like that. And it's sort of, then she wouldn't talk about it, and she wouldn't get any help or anything. She had a lot of problems, and she raised her children very harshly and force-fed them as babies and couldn't handle them as babies. My mom had to take over for a while when my nephews were small. She had a lot of problems, and she grew up with the same mother as I did. So it's no wonder, you know what I mean? That's what it has a huge effect on children, abuse does. And just, when parents say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I used to hate when my mom would say that, because she would beat the crap out of me and then tell me what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. So she was causing the abuse and then trying to make it look like, oh, I'm just doing you a favor. You know what I mean? And she did that my whole youth. That's what she would tell me. And she was trying to make it look like what she was doing was okay, and it was actually helping me out, when actually what she was doing was destroying me. So a lot of psychological damage done there, and a lot of problems. And it took me many, many, many years to sort of see that my mom was very sick, and so was my dad, right? I'll just keep reading here. Childhood trauma can cause severe disturbances in the integration of sensory, emotional, and cognitive information into a cohesive whole. This sets the stage for unfocused and irrelevant responses to subsequent stress. That's from Causalino 2002, Streak, Fisher, and Vanderkolk 2000. They list all their resources here, right? For example, a lack of capacity for emotional self-regulation has been commonly observed in children who experience abuse and neglect. Streak, Fisher, and Vanderkolk, 2000. Childhood trauma has profound impact on the emotional behavior, cognitive, social, and physical functioning of children. Perry et al., 1995. And among other impacts, a traumatized child may, over time, exhibit motor hyperactivity, anxiety, behavioral impulsivity, sleep problems, and hypertension. And that's from Perry et al., 1995. So similarly, adult survivors of child abuse have consistently identified impairments in adult physical and mental health in studies. And that's from Draper in 2007. Even though not everyone exhibits the same set of symptoms or experiences the same intensity of problems, research shows that the long-term effects of child abuse are pervasive across all areas of a survivor's world. Although the association between childhood abuse and adult mental and physical health problems is well documented, less is known about the pathways through which health is compromised. An understanding of the effects of child abuse and neglect on a child's physical, biological, cognitive, social, behavioral, and emotional development helps make sense of their repercussions in adulthood. And pathways linking childhood abuse with adult health outcomes span emotional behavior, social, cognitive, and biological pathways. So they go on to talk about these pathways: emotional pathways, primary attachment to help modulate stress. And this is evidence that caring and secure environments help to moderate the negative impact that stress places on the developing brain. Gunner, 1998. Because safety and bonding are crucial factors in the early construction of the brain, childhood trauma compromises core neural networks. That's from Cozzolino, 2002. And they say here normal play and exploratory activity in children requires the presence of a familiar attachment figure who can help modulate each child's physiological arousal by providing a balance between soothing and stimulation. And that's from Streak, Fisher, and Vanderkolk, 2000. Children feel secure when the caregiver provides consistent, warm, and sensitive care. In secure environments, stressed children, after seeking and receiving comfort from their primary caregiver, return to their exploratory activity away from the primary caregiver. And the caregiver's appropriate soothing response not only protects the child from the effects of stressful situations, but it also enables the child to develop the biological framework for dealing with future stress. And acquiring controllable stress reactions seems to result in central nervous system reactions that facilitate the capacity to deal with subsequent stresses. So devoid of a secure base, children may find they cannot rely on the primary caregiver for comfort and may become incapable of calming themselves down when threatened. And in addition, if children are exposed to unmanageable stress and the caregiver does not modulate the child's arousal, as in situations of family violence, which is how I grew up, the child will be unable to organize his or her experiences in a coherent fashion. Streak, Fisher, and Vanderkolk, 2000. And maybe that's why I was so busy trying to keep all of this stuff in order, right? Who knows? If the child cannot regulate his or her emotional states or rely on others to help, he or she will respond with fight or flight reactions. And cognitive understanding of events helps modulate emotions and enables the formulation of a flexible response. Both cognitive and emotions are important. Children who are denied parental care or comfort for long periods of time can suffer extreme mental and emotional deficits. That was from Vanderhorst, Leroy, and Vanderveer, 2008. Our first intimate or loving relationship is our primary caregiver, and this informs our expectations and patterns of behavior. Harlow, 1958. For example, Bowlby, Bowlby, identified a strong relationship between the pattern of attachment in young children and the pattern of their intimate relationships in later life. And the negative core schema adopted by a survivor as a result of that first attachment fundamentally affects that survivor's capacity to establish and sustain significant attachments throughout life. And survivors often experience conflictual relationships and chaotic lifestyles, frequently report difficulties forming adult intimate attachments, and display behaviors that threaten and disrupt close relationships. Henderson, 2006. And then they go on to talk about the attachment theories. Attachment theory, theory of personality development emanating from John Bowlby's work from 1988 can be used to explain the diverse array of negative outcomes in adult survivors of childhood abuse. Attachment theory suggests that early childhood relationships are internalized and inform an internal working model of the self, others, and any relationships. The internal attachment model developed in the childhood influences the patterns of relationship formation and attachment styles used in adult life, and difficulties associated with abuse-related attachment may be mirrored in relationships throughout a survivor's life. Abuse acts thereby serve as an etiological reservoir for the development of later psychological disorder. That's from Breer, B-R-I-E-R-E, 2002, and Bowlby, 1969, 1973, 1980, and 1988, describe different patterns of attachment which determine children's reaction in the presence of or absence of their mother or primary caregiver. Secure attachments, ambivalent attachments, avoidant attachments, and disorganized attachments. And then they go on to talk about those. So secure attachments. Securely attached children develop inner working models that see others as positively available and themselves as lovable, valued, and socially effective. Bowlby, 1988. Overall, adults with secure attachments have effective strategies for regulating affect. And that's interesting. That's what I think that is so lacking with regarding children who have been abused. If they didn't have a secure attachment, which I don't know a whole lot about attachment, but this is good to be able to read this stuff. Then of course they're not going to their whole world is going to be different, than someone who has a secure attachment, right? So it's quite interesting. Ambivalent attachments. Ambivalent children experience parenting that is inconsistent, unreliable, and emotionally neglectful. Persistent experiences of both emotional and physical neglect may lead children to suffer psychological distress, resulting in feelings such as abandonment and rejection. The ambivalent child clings to the primary caregiver and it exaggerates affect in order to take advantage of the intermittent responsiveness of their inconsistent parent. As an adult, the ambivalent child may be described as clinging, jealous, obsessive, dependent, self-sacrificing, and describe love as a series of emotional highs and lows. And that's from Alexander and Anderson, 1994. Ambivalent adults may be especially sensitive to the possibility of abandonment, rejection, or isolation. Bowlby, 1988. So that's interesting. Ambivalent children, they actually cling to the primary caregiver and exaggerate the effect in order to take advantage of the intermittent responsiveness of their inconsistent parent. I don't think that's me. Even though, I might display some of that, I don't really think that one is mine. The avoidant attachments. Avoidant children experience parenting that is hostile, rejecting, and controlling. They experience little warmth or love, and their emotional needs remain largely unmet. And parents of the avoidant child were not necessarily consistently rejecting. However, their coldness and lack of responsiveness invariably emerged when the child needed help. And the primary caregiver of the avoidant child may respond positively to a child's autonomous behaviors, but misattune to the child's request for nurturance. And that's from Alexander and Anderson, 1994. Therefore, the learned response of the avoidant child is to hold back when feeling needy, so as to not elicit even more rejection from the parent. And this reluctance to express negative affect becomes internalized and may take the form of compulsive self-reliance. Bowlby, 1969. As an adult, the avoidant child may be uncomfortable with intimacy, not confident about others' availability, highly self-reliant, seen as hostile to others, easily frustrated with partners, and overly denying of problems, while exhibiting covert symptoms of anxiety, distress, and dysfunction. It's quite interesting to me to read these different attachment disorders and theories and whatnot. Disorganized attachments. The primary caregiver of the disorganized child tends to be frightening or frightened in his or her reactions with the child. Consequently, the disorganized child is the untended position of having to approach the very caregiver who is the source of the child's anxiety and fearfulness. That's from Alexander and Anderson, 1994. Unable to regulate their affect, these children adopt coping strategies such as disassociation when interacting with the parent. A study by Hertzgaard, Gunnar, Erickson, and Nachmius, 1995, found that infants who exhibit disorganized attachment patterns have higher baseline cortisol levels, a stress hormone, As adults diagnose children, they may see themselves as truly bad, responsible for the trauma, and inherently flawed. They may experience significant distress, depression, and poor social adjustment. And that is Alexander and Anderson, 1994. It says early patterns of attachment set the stage for how children process information and have powerful effects across the lifespan. Secure infants usually grow up being able to rely on both their emotions and thoughts to help them determine reactions to any given situation. Children in abusive environments may learn to either ignore what they feel, emotion, or what they perceive, cognition. That's from Streeck, Fisher, and Vanderkolk, 2000. For example, avoidant children ignore their distress and deal with their needs by relying upon the logic of what they can observe. Being able to inhibit their distress protects them from further harm. So that's Streeck, Fisher, and Vanderkolk, 2000. Ambivalent children may tend to grow up relying on what they are feeling without much thought about the consequences of their actions. Confused about what they perceive, they tune into their feelings at the expense of being able to think about the meaning of their experiences. That's Streeck, Fisher, and Vanderkolk, 2000. Behavioral pathways. Behavioral pathways link childhood abuse and adult health outcomes through health-related behaviors such as smoking, substance abuse, overeating, high-risk sexual behavior, and suicidal behavior. That's Draper et al., 2007. In essence, the survivors of child abuse are more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors that are deleterious to health. And that's from Draper et al., 2007. The high-risk behaviors, alcohol abuse, etc., observed in adult survivors can be viewed as coping strategies initially adopted in childhood to manage rejection, betrayal, and abuse. And the trauma of child abuse is said to stall thought development and behavioral responses, potentially locking survivors into the avoidant coping strategies they used during their childhood, such as detaching, denying, forgetting, disassociating, fantasizing, and withdrawing. And the tendency to dissociate remains with the child as he or she grows into adulthood and impairs the development of adaptive coping mechanisms. That's Breer, 2002. As explained by Perry et al. In 1995, if the threat is ongoing, as is often the case in child abuse situations, responses to threat become personality traits. That's exactly what I recognize that completely. As that's now, I am who I am because people would say that that's not true, that we are not who we are because of the abuse, but that's exactly what it is. I had to pick up, I am who I am because of my personality developed because of the way that my parents treated me. And watching my family in a continual crisis mode and continual stress, and my parents in continual distress, and everyone trying to cope and not able to, and I picked up a certain personality just to be able to develop, just to be able to survive it, and so I was, quite often, always on drugs of some sort, high all the time, on whatever I could find, and kind of considered myself to be the type to, at school, I took on an attitude of, don't mess with me, because I couldn't take any more abuse, and so I had to show the world that I was not going to be pushed around, and that I was more than likely going to be the one to push them around. So I kind of became a little bit hostile and a little bit off by myself, the loner type. I had a few friends, and had I grown up in a normal home, I seriously doubt that I would have behaved that way. That's the whole issue. It does really, it does have a huge effect on people, right? And you can keep on reading down through here. We got about a minute left, and we'll continue this part tomorrow. We'll begin here and continue on through this stuff. It's very, very interesting. I hope you found it interesting. I know I did. It's very helpful for me. So we have about a minute left. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And if you need anything, get a hold of me here on Blog Talk Radio. I wanted to talk about John Harrison's Blog Talk Radio show here on Blog Talk Radio. And that's Be Safe First Always on Blog Talk Radio. Just type into your browser B, the letter B, and then SAFE, S-A-F-E, the number 1, S-T, always, A-L-W-A-Y-S, and it will come up. And John Harrison, he's an advocate. He's an author. He's a poet, and he is also a survivor of child abuse. He has an awesome show. He also has a wonderful website, and I hope everybody will go and check out his stuff. He's got a lot to say, and I believe he's making, there's other people there too, Kate Swift and a whole lot of other people who are doing such great work in the UK. And I really hope that you will check out his blog talk show as well as his website, Kate Swift, This Tangled Web, out of the UK, and Sheva Burton, and with all the other people with the rally against the UK rally against child coming up in August. I wanted to actually do some more talk about that, and we probably will this week. But yeah, it's just awesome what they're doing, and I really want everybody to take a look at what they're doing. And have a great day, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Keep reaching out, and don't suffer in silence. Don't suffer alone. It's really, it's so sad that to survive child abuse, first of all, is hard enough, and then to go through your adult life not reaching out and not getting any help and suffering on your own in silence, that is even worse, because that's what I did, and that's horrible. We have to look for that hope, and we got to keep that hope alive, right? It's so important, and we're the only ones that can do it. No one can do that for us. No one can take that first step and reach out and get that help, right? We're going to have to do that ourselves, and I just hope everybody will do that, and remember that you're not alone. And if you need something and I can possibly help you, please let me know. And I'm a good ear, because I know what it's like to be alone and suffering, right? So, and I love to make friends, and if I can help you with anything, please get a hold of me, okay? Have a great day, everybody, and we'll talk to you real soon. Bye bye.